A warm welcome to the program today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up on the world today. U.S. President Donald Trump will be headed to the World Economic Forum in Davos, where he'll be speaking to leaders why the Arctic territory is important to the United States. Speaking of Davos, is it Macron or 007 Macron? The French president's eyewear draws attention at the meeting. Plus, the Senegalese football team arrives home to a hero's welcome right here on The World Today. Thanks again for joining us. We begin in Davos, where Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima graced the opening ceremony for the first ever Nigeria House on the sidelines of the ongoing World Economic Forum in Davos. In his address, the Vice President said that while nations do not prosper in isolation, Nigeria's future growth depends on deliberate, structured engagement with the global economy.
For the next 1 week, thousands of people, including political leaders, business leaders, civil society organizations, and members of the academia from over 200 countries will converge on Davos clusters in Switzerland for the 56th World Economic Forum. This year's theme, A Spirit of Dialogue, focuses on fostering interactions on 5 priorities, namely cooperating in contested world, unlocking growth, investing in people, deploying innovation responsibly, and building prosperity within planetary boundaries. Nigeria is also showcasing its potential at the World Economic Forum with the establishment of the first ever Nigeria's House, a hub designed to attract investors across various sectors, including solid minerals, sustainable agriculture, creative industry, and digital economy. Vice President Kashim Shettima, who leads the Nigerian delegation to Davos, arrives to officially open the Nigeria House for full operation.
The Nigerian nation, to the African continent, and to the black race. We are mightily proud of this event.
He leads the guests into the hall. As the conversation commences, the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, Mrs. Jumoke Oduwole, spotlights Nigeria's goal at the forum.
The Nigeria House exists for one purpose: to make it easier for credible partners to understand our market, engage our businesses and institutions, and move from interest to partnership. The initiative is part of a broader shift in how Nigeria engages the world, less fragmented, more coordinated, more intentional, and reflects a deeper shift at home towards stronger institutional alignment, clearer accountability, and a shared focus on delivering on Mr. President's economic agenda.
Vice President Kashim Shettima assures that the dividends of the Tinubu administration's reforms are beginning to materialize, noting that the decision to open up to the world more deliberately comes at a turning point in the country's economic journey.
DCO and the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to deliver the keynote address.
He says the formal opening of the Nigeria House is a global business roundtable focused on building a resilient supply chain network for the energy transition.
Nigeria House may have been conceived as a whole-of-government platform led by the Honorable Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, with senior leadership across investment, foreign affairs, energy, infrastructure, technology, climate, and culture gathered under one roof. But its true essence must come from the private sector. Government can open doors, create frameworks, and de-risk environments. Only enterprise can animate growth, scale opportunity, and translate policy into productivity. This House will thrive to the extent that it draws life from private capital, private innovation, and private confidence.
The event climaxes with the launch of the publications on investment opportunities in solid minerals, agriculture, and creative industry, as well as digital sectors. From Davos, Switzerland, Empress Simon, Channels Television News.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump is expected at the Davos meeting to make a case for the U.S. needing the Arctic region, Greenland. However, ahead of his travel, the U.S. president did share private messages from world leaders about Greenland in multiple social media posts overnight, including from French President Emmanuel Macron reading, "I do not understand what you're doing on Greenland." And Trump has been reiterating his threats to acquire the Arctic island, declaring it imperative for national and world security. And there's been response to this at Davos. Just a while ago, Greenland's Prime Minister Jan Frederik Nielsen said the U.S. president's call for the U.S. to take over the vast Arctic territory has created a situation that is about the world order. He also says it is unlikely there will be a use of military force, but it cannot be ruled out. Greenland has hosted a U.S. military base for 75 years and has long maintained a close economic relationship with its NATO ally. The Ukrainian president also added his voice today, emphasizing his respect for Greenland's sovereignty, but was concerned about any distractions from Russia's war in Ukraine. Staying in Davos, the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has described Donald Trump's latest tariff as a mistake in the ongoing row over Greenland. The row over Greenland with the U.S. president has seen him threaten tariffs on countries deploying troops to the Arctic enclave. Reports say the bloc is set to consider the so-called trade bazooka. That's $93 billion in tariffs in response.
I've spoken a lot today about European independence, on partnerships, on prosperity and security. So I would like to conclude with Greenland, an issue which cuts to the heart of all three of these imperatives. When it comes to the security of the Arctic region, Europe is fully committed. And we share the objectives of the United States in this regard. For instance, our EU member, Finland, one of the newest NATO members, is selling its first icebreakers to the United States. And this shows that we have the capability right here in the ice, so to speak. It shows that our northern NATO members have Arctic-ready forces right now. And above all, that Arctic security can only be achieved together. And this is why the proposed additional tariffs are a mistake, especially between long-standing allies. The European Union and the United States have agreed to a trade deal last July. And in politics, as in business, a deal is a deal. And when friends shake hands, it must mean something. Ladies and gentlemen, we consider the people of the United States not just our allies, but our friends. And plunging us into a downward spiral would only aid the very adversaries we are both so committed to keeping out of the strategic landscape. So our response will be unflinching, united, and proportional.
As for the French President Emmanuel Macron, who drew inquisitive looks with his eyewear at Davos, the world is reaching a time of instability and unbalances. Speaking to a packed audience and wearing aviator glasses, as you see there, while adopting a sharp tone, he urged Europe not to hesitate to deploy all tools at its disposal to protect itself.
We are reaching a time of instability, of imbalances, both from the security and defense point of view and the economic point of view. Look at the situation where we are. I mean, a shift towards autocracy against democracy, more violence, more than 60 wars in 2024, an absolute record, even if I understood a few of them were fixed. And conflict has become normalized, hybrid, expanding into new domains, space, digital, information, cyber, trade, and so on. It's as well a shift towards a world without rules, where international law is trampled underfoot, and where the only law that seems to matter is that of the strongest, and imperial ambitions are resurfacing. Obviously, the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, which will enter into its 4th year next month, and conflicts continue in the Middle East and across Africa. This is as well a shift towards a world without effective collective governance, and where multilateralism is weakened by powers that obstruct it or turn away from it, and rules are undermined. And I can multiply the examples of international bodies weakened or left by the key economies.
French President Emmanuel Macron. In another development, the Chinese Foreign Ministry says China has received an invitation from the U.S. after President Donald Trump announced the creation of a peace council for Gaza and invited the leaders of several nations to participate. The newly formed council focuses on a coalition of willing partners, primarily inviting leaders from Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE to lead efforts to reconstruct Gaza. It remains unclear to what extent China would be involved or whether Beijing has accepted the invitation. During the press briefing in Beijing today, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson discussed the current state of China-U.S. relations, noting that while they have experienced ups and downs, the two sides have achieved overall dynamic stability, which is in line with the common interests of the people of both countries and the common expectations of the international community. And back in the United States, January 19 was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a federal holiday in the country observed on the third Monday of January each year. The late Martin Luther King Jr. was the chief spokesperson for nonviolent activism and civil rights movements, which protested legalized racial discrimination in federal and state law and civil society. Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird had a conversation with civil rights leader Reverend Mark Thompson on the meaning of the holiday.
Mark Thompson, it's always a pleasure to be with you. I know that we are celebrating MLK Day, Dr. Martin Luther King's holiday, and it's a really interesting time in our country, specifically as we look at what's going on with the Trump administration, what's going on, ICE agents. It's just so much that our country's challenged with. Tell us why today is different than other King holidays.
Well, first of all, Maria, thank you for having me and great to see you. I think we have to consider, as oftentimes in ministry and in faith life, we ask ourselves, what would Jesus do? I think we have to ask ourselves, what would MLK do at this time? Whereas we have a fascist and we have practiced authoritarianism here in this country. We have the Voting Rights Act, which he marched from Selma to Montgomery for, in jeopardy. And we have these crises all over the world. Dr. King was an internationalist and a Pan-Africanist. He spoke out against the Vietnam War. He spoke out against the plight of the Palestinians and sought peace and justice in the Middle East. So I think he would have been more outspoken than ever. And he was outspoken significantly before he died. But I think with everything going on in the world, invasions, kidnapping of other world leaders, there is no way that Dr. King would not have kept silent in the midst of all of this. He would have decried the assault on our democracy. You can't say those in Minneapolis who were protesting the death of Renee Good or those in LA protesting the death of Keith Porter, both at the hands of ISIS forces. That's ICE apostrophe S, but sounds the same. You can't say that those protesting are insurrectionists and then say January 6th was not an insurrection and then pardon everyone. So these are the questions I think before us, and I think it's incumbent upon us to carry out the unfinished business, I should say, of Dr. King and live out his legacy and raise these questions, the militarism in our communities. He spoke about the triple evils, Dr. King did, racism, poverty, and militarism. And so we're seeing the militarization of federal forces in our community. So he would have been outspoken. And so if we ask what would MLK do, the answer should be that we should do all the things he would do at this hour.
No, you know, you hit it on some things around what we should be doing. We know the youth are coming up. We know it's a new time, a new day. What should they be understanding about the call to action as they're seeing, and many of them aren't understanding kind of how this relates to history? What should their call of action, how should they be moving? We know social media is a huge push factor around getting the voice out, getting the message out. How should they respond today?
Well, first of all, I think he too would have decried some of the problems with social media. For all the good social media does, it also does a lot of harm. And there are algorithms targeted to confuse young people. But young people should understand that both Dr. King and Malcolm X were young men when they were killed. They weren't even 40 years old yet. And as Malcolm said to young people, think for yourselves, listen for yourselves, speak for yourselves. And Dr. King said that the greatest thing you could do as a human being and as a young person is to serve. So I think young people should take that cue and scrutinize things that they're seeing on social media that may be misleading them. Anything that is trying to turn young people away from justice and activism and from their own culture and constituency is very, very problematic. We saw algorithms targeting Black men not to vote for Kamala Harris, but not one post discouraging Black men to not vote for two white female candidates, Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger. That's very interesting, isn't it? So that ought to be a tell that young people must scrutinize and share not just social stuff, not just sports, but share with your peers the important things, especially today, that Dr. King did in his life. Encourage conversations amongst peers in your generation. Why was this? Ask the questions. Really ask themselves the question you're asking, Maria Bennett. Why should I be concerned about Dr. King as a young person? What did Dr. King do all those years ago that could impact me now? And most importantly, remember that he was young when he was killed. He was stopped because he had youthful energy and youthful idealism. We need to restore that. We need to resurrect that in this generation today.
And Reverend Thompson, as we close out, if you can just tell us today, what is the greatest threat to the civil rights of African Americans and people of color in the United States?
The United States Supreme Court is the greatest threat as they consider Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. They already took out Section 4. Section 2 would be equally damaging. This would prevent scrutiny when it comes to states coming up with their own voting laws, especially when those states have a history of discrimination. And that's what the Voting Rights Act protected. And it wasn't just Dr. King. People came from all over the world at his call to Selma to march from Selma to Montgomery. It was the culminating moment in that civil rights movement. And this was a sacred time. And so we must be sure that that's preserved, because if we lose the Voting Rights Act, then most certainly we will lose democracy. And someone like the authoritarian Donald Trump may be able to stay in office infinitely.
Well, Mark Thompson, thank you for joining. Thank you for your time. We look forward to maybe talking to you again soon.
Looking forward to it as well. Thank you for having me, Maria Bennett.
Our correspondent Maria Bird with civil rights leader Reverend Mark Thompson on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Moving on, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the UK should not be embarrassed or humiliated by its decision to give up sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. Darren Jones, his chief secretary, said this today in an interview with the BBC. It follows criticism from US President Donald Trump, who said the UK was giving up the islands for no reason whatsoever, calling it an act of great stupidity. The UK agreed to give up control of the Chagos Islands last year following a number of legal battles and months of criticism, including from Donald Trump. Jones said Diego Garcia, the largest island in the Chagos archipelago, was having its sovereignty challenged by the Mauritian government. Chilean fighters are still working to contain the flames in Pancos forests as ongoing wildfires engulf Biobío region. The scorched forests and burned down homes characterize the scenery now, with thick smoke blankets in the area as firefighters conducted containment operations. The government of Chile has imposed a curfew in the Biobío region for the locality of Liquen. The measure runs from 7 p.m. until further notice. In Penco, Nacimiento, and Laya, the curfew is from 8 in the evening until 6. Fires have also been recorded in Ubal region, where around 50 homes have been affected. President Gabriel Boric declared a state of catastrophe in both regions on Sunday, following the deaths of 18 people. Now, Uganda's opposition leader, Bobi Wine, has told the BBC he will not contest the results of Thursday's election in court, citing a lack of confidence in the judiciary, and has instead urged supporters to take this to the streets to peacefully protest. Speaking to the broadcaster from hiding, he said he would continue to stand up to President Yoweri Museveni despite concerns for his safety. The 81-year-old Museveni won the vote by a landslide and has accused the opposition of seeking to overturn the results through violence, calling them terrorists. He gained 72% of the vote, while Wine, his close challenger, got only 25%. Bobi Wine, whose real name is Robert Kyagulanyi, maintains the results are fake and has cited ballot stuffing without providing any details. And we'll be seeing them in a moment. The Teranga Lions of Senegal returning home to a hero's welcome in Senegal. There they are. Supporters gathered outside the Blaise Diagne International Airport, waving flags and playing music as the squad arrived. At night fell, crowds increased and lined up the routes into the city, cheering the team as the bus passed under police supervision. As we remember, Senegal clinched their second AFCON trophy on Sunday after a thrilling clash against Morocco at Rabat's Prince Moulay Abdellah Stadium. The match reached a dramatic climax when the hosts were awarded a stoppage time penalty, sparking furious protests from Senegal's players and a 15-minute walk-off. Morocco's Brahim Diaz then saw his spot kick saved by Edouard Mendy before Pape Gueye struck in the first period of extra time to seal the title for the Teranga Lions. The win gives Senegal a second Africa Cup of Nations title following their 2021 triumph, while Morocco remains without a continental title since 1976, despite reaching the final on home soil. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.